Good evening, and thank you for joining us tonight. Tempers fly in former President Trump's New York criminal trial as lawyers argue over jury instructions. This comes after Trump's defense team rested its case Tuesday without calling the former president to testify. Our legal correspondent Arlene Richards has more details.
Attorneys in former President Trump's New York criminal trial debated vigorously Tuesday afternoon after the defense rested its case. Both sides argued about instructions on the law that the judge will read to the jury next week when deliberations begin. Trump said there is no crime.
So maybe they'll try and devise one right now. The judge will help them out because the judge has been very helpful to the other side. And that should never be in our country.
The defense pushed for language that would help the jury understand what the law is and how it works. For example, Trump's attorney Todd Blanche argued that New York law recognizes that conspiracy charges require a willfully component. Falsifying business records in the first degree requires that there be intent to commit another crime. The defense said the prosecution didn't prove criminal intent, and if there was a violation, it was civil, and therefore Trump can't be convicted of a crime. But the prosecution maintained that the conspiracy itself is the crime. Other areas argued include how to define words in the federal election law and in New York law. The judge didn't rule on most of the issues, but he denied the defense's request that the jury be told there was no limit on federal candidates' contributions to their own campaigns. In other courtroom drama Tuesday, key defense witness Robert Costello completed his testimony. Costello came off as a fiery witness on Monday, but Judge Juan Merchan threatened to strike his testimony. Costello had made remarks after Merchan made several rulings that favored the prosecution. Costello testified on Monday that he previously represented Michael Cohen and that Cohen repeatedly told him Trump knew nothing about the $130,000 payment. On cross-examination, the prosecution showed the jury emails from Cohen saying he wasn't hiring Costello's firm. Judge Merchan excused the jury until next Tuesday, at which time both sides will give closing arguments. The jury will begin deliberations on Wednesday. Arlene Richards reporting from the criminal courthouse in Manhattan.
President Biden touting an election year legislative win as he seizes on a new video shared by Trump's social media account. Trump's team pushing back against accusations. NTD's Iris Tao has more from the White House.
In New Hampshire, President Biden highlighting his work for veterans and also announcing there have been 1 million veterans who applied for disability benefits under his legislation.
A major milestone, providing $5.7 million in benefits to 890,000 veterans and families so far in hand, including 3,000 here in New Hampshire.
The PACT Act passed in 2022 expanded benefits to veterans impacted by toxic exposures. Biden has long blamed burn pits for leading to the brain cancer that killed his son, Beau Biden.
Folks, you suffered long enough. You shouldn't have to prove that your illness came from their service.
Biden on Tuesday also campaigned in Boston, where he accused Trump of using Hitler's language over a video shared by Trump's social media account on Monday.
What happens after Donald Trump wins? What's next for America?
The 30-second video, now deleted, features references to the creation of a unified Reich, along with hypothetical news headlines should Trump win in 2024. Biden asked about the phrase,
unified Reich in a social media post? Your reaction?
And Biden's campaign is again calling Trump a potential dictator. Meanwhile, Trump's campaign pushing back says the video was, quote, created by a random account online and reposted by a staffer who clearly did not see the word. And Trump's campaign on the same day also touted that it outraised Biden's campaign by $25 million in April, even as Trump was confined to a courtroom for the past 4 weeks. And Biden still holds a significant cash edge over Trump, though he's trailing behind Trump in polls in major battleground states. Reporting from the White House, Iris Tao, NTD News.
Former New York City Mayor Rudy Giuliani today pleading not guilty to 9 felony counts. The charges stem from his role in challenging the results of the 2020 presidential election in Arizona. Giuliano received a summons last Friday night after his 80th birthday party. 10 other co-defendants in the case also pleaded not guilty to conspiracy, forgery, and fraud charges. That includes former Arizona GOP Chair Kelly Ward. Giuliani's spokesperson said the charges are politically motivated. Arizona is the fourth state in which Trump allies have been charged for challenging the 2020 election results. The former mayor's trial is scheduled on October 17th, just weeks before Election Day. Breaking news, the Justice Department is suing Oklahoma over its new immigration law. The law makes it a state crime punishable by up to 2 years in prison to live in the state without legal status. Similar laws in Texas and Iowa already are facing challenges from the DOJ. New polls on illegal immigration are out this week. Two separate surveys find that over half of Americans support the deportation of illegal immigrants. This as the border is shaping up to become a key issue during this year's presidential elections.
A Reuters Ipsos poll released on Monday found that 56% of all voters say they support deporting most or all illegal immigrants in the U.S. The number goes up to 61% for independent voters. Meanwhile, a new Rasmussen report released this week asked people about the choice between deporting illegal immigrants or granting them amnesty. It found that 52% would vote for a candidate who favored deportation. 36% would support a candidate who favored amnesty. The rest were undecided. Former President Trump has repeatedly said he'd deport large numbers of illegal immigrants if he wins this year's election.
And they do come from prisons and mental institutions, and they are terrorists. And we're going to be paying a price, and it'll be the largest deportation in the history of our country. And we have no choice.
Meanwhile, Newsweek released a separate poll on Monday regarding crime in New York City. It found that 70% of New York voters blame migrants in the city for the current crime rate. 41% say immigration is having a significant impact, and 31% say it has a fair amount of impact. And a fact check over non-citizen voting is causing a stir on Tuesday. Just last week, a House committee held a hearing probing how to prevent non-citizen voting in federal elections.
Since President Biden took office, over 7 million illegal immigrants have crossed the southern border. We must ensure our elections are secure.
Now on Tuesday, fact-checker PolitiFact discredited a statement made by House Speaker Mike Johnson, who said some immigrants can register to vote. PolitiFact posted, "It's illegal for non-citizens to vote." Some Republicans were quick to respond. Congressman Chip Roy tweeted, "Non-citizens have myriad opportunities to register to vote." Senator Mike Lee responded, "PolitiFact rates a true claim false, yet again, simply because the writer doesn't like it."
The Republican-led House of Representatives is teeing up a vote on a bill that would prohibit non-citizens from voting in local elections in the District of Columbia. NTD's Washington correspondent Luis Martinez has the details.
The House Rules Committee held a hearing on Tuesday to discuss legislation to repeal a 2022 Voting Act amendment that allows for non-citizens to vote in the District of Columbia. This is the second time Republicans try to repeal this 2022 Voting Act amendment. The last time was in February, and it passed the House floor, but it did not get a vote in the Senate.
We have Washington, D.C. aggressively not only allowing non-citizens to vote, in particular for mayor and other key elections in the city, but so much as actively encouraging non-citizens to vote. I think this should be an area where folks on the left should actually be willing to work with us to make sure that we're addressing these concerns, to maintain that U.S. elections are for U.S. citizens.
In 2022, the Democrat-led D.C. Council passed legislation to allow non-citizens to vote in local elections. The U.S. Congress made voting of non-citizens in federal elections illegal back in 1996, but that law does not apply to local elections. Currently, there are at least 16 jurisdictions in the country that allow for non-citizen voting, most notably in the states of California, Maryland, and Vermont, and the District of Columbia. Democrats who oppose the repeal effort argue that non-citizen voting is not an issue.
MAGA extremists are laying the groundwork to overturn the 2024 election. to betray once again the will of the American people. This hearing is about preemptively covering Donald Trump's lies. The hearing isn't about law and order. It's about laying the foundation for the next big lie. It's about saying that illegal voting is the cause of an election defeat.
This is not a bipartisan effort. House Democratic leadership is asking its conference to vote against the measure. Speaker of the House Mike Johnson is expected to put the repeal effort on the House floor for a vote this week, and it's expected to pass with Republican support. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Luis Eduardo Martinez, NTD News.
Frightening moments in the skies above the Indian Ocean when a Singapore Airlines flight hit severe turbulence. One person is dead, and investigators say dozens of passengers were injured, some severely.
A 73-year-old British man was killed, and injured passengers were stretched off the flight after the plane fell into an air pocket before encountering turbulence. The Boeing 777 flight from London's Heathrow Airport to Singapore, with 211 passengers and 18 crew members aboard, was diverted and landed in stormy weather in Bangkok. Dozens were taken to hospital, including one crew member. The tarmac became a makeshift emergency room to treat the injured. A senior airport official said the British man likely died due to a heart attack, while 7 people were critically injured with head injuries. A passenger on board said the plane tilted upwards and began shaking. Then he said a dramatic drop saw people launched into baggage cabins overhead, their bodies denting and breaking the panels. A spokesperson for Flight Radar 24 said data analysis from the plane's journey shows the plane tilting upwards and returned to its cruising altitude over the space of a minute. The airline said it is working with Thai authorities to provide all necessary assistance. Boeing said it was also ready to provide support.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Israel will return a seized camera and broadcasting equipment belonging to the Associated Press. Hours earlier, they seized the equipment under a new law that regulates foreign media. And tensions remain high in the Middle East as the UN halts all food delivery to Rafah. NTD's Fiona G has more.
Shortly before the equipment was seized today, it was being used to broadcast a general view of northern Gaza. AP states that they comply with Israel's military censorship rules, avoiding details that could endanger soldiers. But the communications ministry said AP photographers regularly focus on IDF soldiers and their locations. Israel also accused the news organization of violating the law by providing images to Al Jazeera, a media network which Prime Minister Netanyahu previously labeled the Hamas mouthpiece. The Qatari satellite channel is one of thousands of AP customers who receive live video. Earlier this month, the Israeli government used the same law to shutter the offices and broadcast facilities of Al Jazeera. But the seizure drew criticism from the Biden administration, journalism organizations, and an Israeli opposition leader. Under the pressure, the Israeli government announced just hours later that it would return the equipment to the AP. Meanwhile, the UN announced today it is halting food delivery to Rafah due to insecurity and lack of supplies. A spokesperson has warned that humanitarian aid in Gaza will collapse and famine will spread if aid delivery doesn't resume. Fiona G, NTD News.
While testifying before Congress today, Secretary of State Antony Blinken was interrupted by several anti-Israel protesters. NTD's Washington correspondent Jack Bradley has more from Capitol Hill.
Secretary of State Antony Blinken testified in front of the Senate Foreign Relations Committee on the State Department's budget hearing on Tuesday. During his opening remarks, though, he was interrupted by several anti-Israel protesters.
The need for U.S. global leadership and for cooperation with allies and partners has never been greater. The People's Republic of China is pursuing military.
Was 6 years old when Israelis killed her. His weapon was 6 years old. Blinken, you look.
As I was saying, the People's Republic of China.
War criminal. He is a war criminal. The blood of 40,000.
The People's Republic of China is pursuing military, economic, and geopolitical preeminence, challenging our vision for a free, open, secure, and prosperous international order. The President's FY25 budget.
Funding a genocide in Gaza. There have been 7 mass graves outside of hospitals. This is sick. This is deranged.
The hearing focused more on foreign policy, especially in regards to the threat the Chinese Communist Party poses to the U.S., as well as the wars in Ukraine and Gaza. Now, Blinken reiterated U.S. support for Israel, as well as providing humanitarian aid to those in Gaza. I spoke to several senators at the hearing who said that the budget falls short, but they differed with each other in terms of policy.
I think we should have a larger investment in diplomacy, including foreign assistance. So no, I think we should have a larger budget.
We need to be more robust in certain areas in the humanitarian side.
The budget's biggest focus is on climate change. That focus doesn't help Ukraine or Israel or help our allies compete against China.
Blinken is requesting $58 billion to fund the State Department as well as U.S. aid abroad, $2 billion to fund international infrastructure around the world, $1 billion to the World Bank, and $1.7 billion to international organizations like the United Nations. Blinken is set to return to Capitol Hill on Wednesday, where he'll testify in front of the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the House Appropriations Subcommittee. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Jack Bradley, NTD News.
During the hearing, Blinken said he wants to work with Congress on laws to penalize the International Criminal Court for issuing arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. He called it a profoundly wrong-headed decision. Yesterday, the White House and lawmakers from both parties condemned the ICC's actions, and House Speaker Mike Johnson said Republicans are looking into sanctioning the court. In Iran, days of funeral processions have begun for the regime's late president and other officials killed in the helicopter crash. The funeral processions include a series of ceremonies led by the regime. They began in the closest major city near the site of the crash. Thousands in black slowly walked beside the coffins. Some threw flowers, and an MC wept through a loudspeaker. The regime's supreme leader, Ayatollah Khamenei, declared 5 days of national mourning. He will preside over a separate funeral procession in the capital, Tehran. It's unclear how many foreign dignitaries will show up, but Russia, Iraq, and Turkey have confirmed they will be sending their officials. Iranian authorities warned people over showing any public signs of celebrating Raisi's death. A heavy security force presence has been seen on the streets of Tehran since the crash. Earlier, we spoke with Josh Hasten, Middle East correspondent at Jewish News Syndicate. We discussed the death of the Iranian president and the response we saw from the U.S. State Department. Josh Hasten, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much.
Now, the Iranian president's memorial has been quite muted. This is amid public unrest. Now, how do you view his death impacting the war in Gaza?
So honestly, I think that it will have little impact on the war of Gaza. The president of Iran is really a puppet. He has to listen to what the Ayatollah tell him. Obviously, he himself is known as the butcher of Tehran, so he has a very disturbing past, which obviously resonates with the people of Iran who oppose the regime. But overall, Iran is still very much in power. They are the octopus of terrorism in the Middle East, with their tentacles everywhere from Hamas in Gaza to Hezbollah in Lebanon to the Houthis in Yemen. They are the biggest state sponsor of terror in the world, and that's a threat, and not only to Israel, but that's a threat to the United States and the entire Western world. I think they'll continue to push on. We know they're pushing towards nuclear weapons, and that is something Israel cannot allow.
And given that threat to the U.S. as well that you just laid out, and that his name was known as the Butcher of Tehran, the U.S. State Department has been making headlines because it issued condolences following his death. How do you read that? What's the message here?
Yeah, that's completely repulsive. I mean, would somebody call up Hitler's family after his passing and send condolences? I mean, this man murdered 30,000 of his own people, and that's why you saw the fireworks going off throughout Iran yesterday. They want to be PC, if you will, but it's really having the opposite effect. It's showing weakness. So it's a terrible mistake by the State Department and the other countries. Many other countries, including, by the way, they have an International Atomic Committee who's supposed to be investigating Iran. They send condolences to Iran, and these are the people supposed to be preventing Iran from going nuclear, an absolute disgrace.
Now, speaking of the war in Gaza, the Associated Press reported earlier today that Israeli authorities had shut down its live camera feed showing the war in Gaza. That was over reports that it was feeding that feed to Al Jazeera, which of course was kicked out of Gaza. Now, reports are saying that Israeli communications ministers are now ordering those seized cameras to be returned to the Associated Press, perhaps following massive backlash. How do you read all of this?
Yeah, obviously there was a lot of pressure from the Associated Press and journalists and governments around the world calling people to return the equipment. But that being said, we have to recognize what apparently the AP was doing, that is turning over sensitive information to Al Jazeera. And Al Jazeera is the media of Hamas, nothing less. They have been spewing anti-Israel propaganda for many, many years. He should not be in cahoots with Al Jazeera. I think they're doing fine on their own. They don't have to, especially getting sensitive information to be, as I said before, the media arm of a terrorist organization.
Josh Hasten, thank you so much for your time. The judge says he is going to make every effort to get the jury instructions to the two legal teams by the end of Thursday. They can then have 4 days to prepare their closing arguments for May 28th. Joining me now to discuss Trump's trial is David Katz, former assistant U.S. attorney and former federal prosecutor. David, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you here.
Great to be with you, Tiffany.
Now, to begin, Trump's defense team has now rested their case. The defense, of course, does not need to prove anything, but that lies with the prosecution. Trump said this morning that they have no case and that there is no crime. What is your read on the case so far? How did the prosecution do?
Well, I think the prosecution presented a pretty compelling case. I think that they were well prepared. I think they did a lot better than some skeptics thought at the beginning when the U.S. Attorney's Office did not go on this case, even under the Biden administration. And so they thought, well, if the feds shied away from it, the state was going to have a lot of trouble. But I thought that they presented a compelling case with, starting with the National Enquirer editor and then all the way through Stormy Daniels. That was controversial. And Michael Cohen, I thought, presented himself pretty well.
Now, the jury has been sent home for a week with closing arguments expected next Tuesday. In an unprecedented case like this, how important are jury instructions? How will that impact the jury's decision?
The jury instructions are critical. And one of the reasons was that if this case stays a misdemeanor, the statute of limitations has run. If all that Trump did was falsify records knowingly, he will be convicted of a misdemeanor, and then the case will be thrown out because it's no longer good under the statute of limitations. Tiffany, it has to be bumped up to a felony. And so the whole argument is it shouldn't be just some unlawful conduct. That's so vague, bumps it up to a felony. The three unlawful conducts are potentially that Trump intentionally violated state campaign finance laws. Or number two, he knowingly, intentionally violated federal campaign finance laws. Or number three, he violated federal and state tax laws. They've never had to pin the tail on the donkey in this case, and the prosecution hasn't. And so what they've argued in jury instructions is make the jury decide unanimously which of the three, all of the three. If the judge had gone that way, I think they would have had a lot of trouble unanimously agreeing. And if they do unanimously agree on this vague, unlawful conduct, that will be Trump's argument on appeal, that there should have been more specificity and less vagueness. But the judge has decided to go with the vaguer and less specific approach and accept unanimity if on merely unlawful conduct. It'll be an interesting appellate issue if he's found guilty.
Expanding on that, in your opinion, what should the jury instructions include then?
Well, I think that somehow an appellate court should have ruled on this ahead of time, but that's not really how our system works. First, you have the trial, then you have the finding of guilty or not, then you have the sentencing to whatever it is, and then you have the appeal. But obviously, if there should have been unanimity on the specific three, one of the three, all of the three, the Court of Appeal will send the case back for a retrial sometime after the November election.
And David, do you think a week is too long to wait before the jury hears closing arguments? Is this kind of a gap unusual?
It's totally unusual. And one of the things is that you have a jury that's not sequestered. You have a jury that we worried a lot about. The gag order was that Trump not make statements about some of the witnesses, but especially about the jurors. And the idea was that, they're not sequestered. And so if that's so, that you're worried about they're not sequestered and they're going to be out there, why leave them out there another week? So I think that the judge got a little bit faked out on that one, but it may also be that he needs more time because it is really a momentous decision what the jury instructions are going to be. It's so important that they be clear and correct under New York law.
And David, there were some tense moments in the courtroom today between Judge Juan Merchan and Robert Castillo, the final witness for the defense. Do you think Castillo's testimony hurt the defense?
Well, you know, the Southern District of New York is one of the great offices in the country, and I was with the LA office, which we consider ourselves a rival of the New York office out there in Los Angeles. But, you know, there are two famous people from the U.S. Attorney's Office. One is Rudy Giuliani, and the other one is Robert Castillo, and they have both, in my opinion, made a disgrace of being from that office. I mean, Castillo acted in a way that I thought was totally unprofessional, and apparently the judge thought it was unprofessional. You know, people who aren't lawyers know not to do what he did in court. And I have to believe, because he's an intelligent person, totally in the Trump camp in my view, that he was hoping to provoke the judge into an error. He was hoping, and the Trump team was hoping, that he would have an outburst, the judge would have an outburst in front of the jury, and then they would argue, oh, the jury was tainted, you see this, the judge got furious. The judge was smart enough before he told Castillo to knock it off and to not act so unprofessionally as a witness on the stand. He had the jury removed, and so the jury was not prejudiced, the jury was not tainted. But it was really remarkable, and of course that was the star witness for the defense. So to get off on such a wrong foot on their only key witness, I thought was just a little bit of an unforced error, and that they had so much on Castillo. I mean, they wanted Castillo to say, you know, I represented Michael Cohen for a while. I talked to Michael Cohen, and Michael Cohen told me I have nothing on Trump. As much as I would like to have an escape route for this case, I got nothing on him. But when you look at the circumstances that were sure to emerge, Tiffany, on cross-examination, you know, he was really on Trump's side all along. He seemed to never have been on Michael Cohen's side. He seemed to be just trying to find out what he could from Michael Cohen and use it in just the way that he did. So I don't think it's going to really work very well for Trump.
Now, speaking of Trump, Trump had said initially that he would testify in his own defense, but didn't end up doing so. Now, he cited the gag order as the reason, but the judge, Juan Merchan, actually said the gag order doesn't stop Trump from testifying. Was this the right decision in your view of Trump not testifying?
Trump's bravado is he's always the tough guy who wants to testify. He wanted to testify and tell his story to Mueller. Remember that? But he never did. And he wanted to tell his story to the jury, and he never did. I think his lawyers would have been really, I thought they did a good job. Trump's lawyers did too. But I thought it would have been malpractice if they had put Trump on the stand. There were so many things that could go wrong. There were so many things that he would be cross-examined about. But his argument on appeal, besides the other one that I mentioned, if he does get found guilty, by the way, I don't think he'll be sentenced to any jail time, even if he is found guilty. But he'll argue on appeal. I think also on this very issue, I think that he'll argue that the gag order was wrong, and that he was told that he would be cross-examined on certain things. That was one of the Harvey Weinstein issues that led to his trial being thrown out and being sent back for a new trial, that he would have been cross-examined on too many things. The judge was going to include too many things that he could have been cross-examined about. When he realized that the judge was doing that, he shied away from testifying, and that was the reason the overbroad cross-examination that would have been allowed of him had he taken the stand. I don't think he's going to get anywhere on that issue. The first one, I think, is the big one, whether the judge was too vague in the unlawful, the unlawful aims. I think he should have been more specific. I think that might have led to a hung jury, but I think that would have been the wiser legal ruling for the long term. But I think with the ruling that he made, it's much more likely that Trump will be found guilty of a felony than had he made the other ruling.
Wow, quite fascinating. David Katz, former assistant U.S. attorney and former federal prosecutor, thank you so much for your time.
Great to be with you, Tiffany.
Have Americans in Oregon had enough of relaxed crime policies? We could find out in just a few hours as voters cast their ballots in today's primary races. Progressive and mainstream Democrats are battling it out. NTD's Melina Weiskup has more on the key races.
Portland, Oregon is one of the nation's most liberal cities. But are its citizens happy with far-left policies that have been enacted over recent years? Tonight's key Democratic primaries may shed some light on this. Portland's District Attorney Mike Schmidt is facing a primary challenge from his own employee, Nathan Vasquez. Vasquez has criticized his boss's soft-on-crime policies, and he's running his own campaign on returning accountability to a city that's grappling with rising homelessness, crime, and drug abuse. Schmidt, elected in 2020 during the rise of Black Lives Matter protests, decriminalized a number of felonies and misdemeanors. In addition, the district attorney threw his support behind a policy change to legalize hard drugs. And a surge in opioid overdoses followed last year. 628 in just 6 months, compared to 280 in all of 2019. After this failure, the state then voted to recriminalize hard drugs. One of the state lawmakers who voted for this is now running for a seat in the U.S. Congress, Democrat Maxine Dexter. Dexter is facing off with a progressive Democrat, Sushila Jayapal, to fill the seat of retiring Congressman Earl Blumenauer. In addition, Dexter is seen as the pro-Israel recruit, as opposed to Jayapal, who, like her sister, who's serving as the chairwoman of the Progressive Caucus in Congress, has refused to denounce the Hamas terrorist attacks. Several Democrat groups have rallied behind with support for Dexter, which could hint that Democrats are leaning more towards supporting moderate candidates versus progressive ones. Oregon's primary races tonight are among several others, and after tonight, there will be only 8 presidential nomination contests left. Reporting from Washington, D.C., Melina Weiskup, NTD News.
Energy demand is expected to skyrocket as technology use spreads. Energy leaders say massive changes are needed just to keep the lights on. NTD's Virginia Gibson has more.
We cannot be open for business if we cannot keep the lights on.
Energy demand is projected to grow drastically. At a Senate hearing on Tuesday, lawmakers said this may be one of America's greatest challenges.
Just a few years ago, a large-scale industrial manufacturing facility might require 100 megawatts, or about enough to power 100,000 homes. A facility that size would typically be one of a kind in a region, would be a major source of economic activity for that area. Now it is common for a single data center to require 3 up to 15 times this amount of power.
American Electric Power Company President Benjamin Folk said customers are requesting amounts of energy that are double that of current peak demand. He said America needs massive change to reliably serve a fraction of future needs.
ChatGPT requires 2.9 watt-hours for a request. Now, that's nearly 10 times more power than a typical Google search.
He said artificial intelligence, cloud computing, and Bitcoin mining are largely driving the energy demand, a demand that involves reliability.
If you take power away for milliseconds, you cause astonishing economic destruction. You don't get to ask them, would you please turn it off right now? The wind isn't blowing. And our batteries have run out.
Energy expert Mark Mills said America should have diverse sources of energy. Throwing out fossil fuels and replacing them with renewables may not work. One reason: batteries aren't reliable.
They're extraordinarily expensive ways to store energy. On an engineering physics basis, roughly 100 times more expensive than the traditional ways to store energy. Tanks, caverns, piles of coal.
Mills said tens of trillions of dollars worth of batteries would be needed for a full-scale renewable energy America, an amount the world isn't capable of producing.
We encourage investigation in all sources of new generation, like new hydro, new nuclear, small modular reactors, geothermal, battery technology for wind and solar to make them more reliable.
Tech executive Scott Gatzmeier encouraged developing all sources of energy and requiring sufficient new generation before retiring existing generation. Virginia Gibson, NTD News.
Welcome back. I'm Tiffany Meyer now for your sports news. We're joined by NTD's Dave Martin over at the Sports Hub. Dave, a lot going on today, but let's start in the WNBA, where Clark has just signed a new endorsement deal with Wilson, which produces the basketballs for the league. Is there anything about this deal that's unique?
Yeah, it's reportedly going to include a signature basketball collection. Now, that's important because really the only other person they've ever done that for is the great Michael Jordan. Now, unfortunately for Caitlin Clark, her Indiana Fever are not having a great season. They lost last night to fall to 0-4. But individually, she's now 17th in the league in scoring, 11th in assists, and 1st in three-pointers made. But still, the crowds are still following her, which is why she's going to add to her haul of endorsements already. I mean, she already has Nike, Gatorade, and State Farm. As we've already said, she comes to sold-out arenas almost every night, so she has already been quite the draw for the WNBA this season.
Looking at sports memorabilia news, a Babe Ruth jersey from the 1932 World Series is heading to auction this August. Now, Heritage Auctions, which will be holding the auction, says it could go for as much as $30 million. What makes this particular jersey so valuable?
I mean, not only is it almost 100 years old, it was worn by still the most famous baseball player of all time, Babe Ruth. And this was when he had his most famous home run. This is the called shot in the 1932 World Series, Game 5. And by called shot, I mean he pointed to the outfield and hit a long home run there, reportedly 440 feet. To put the Yankees ahead. They ended up sweeping the Cubs in the World Series. Now, what makes it a little bit more intriguing is there's actually some dispute over where or who he was actually pointing to. Now, the bidding on this Babe Ruth jersey is going to start at $7.5 million, and this will be starting in August.
Shifting gears to baseball, the Dodgers two-way star Shohei Ohtani made waves in the offseason when he signed a $700 million contract. Now, because of an arm injury, he's not pitching this season, but clearly it hasn't affected his hitting. Does he have a chance to win another MVP this year?
You know, I'd say yes, but keep in mind, no players ever won an MVP award in a season in which they were the team's primary designated hitter, like Ohtani is for this year's Dodgers. Now, that said, Ohtani is having quite a start to the season. Let's actually take a look here. Shohei Ohtani, this is 6 major offensive categories. Batting average, he's first in the majors, as well as slugging percentage, and his 67 hits, those are all first. 13 home runs, that's fourth, as well as those 424 slugging percentage. He's got 33 RBIs, that is good for 11th in the league. Now, one relatively new metric that is used to measure a player's worth is actually called wins above replacement. Now, quite simply, wins above replacement measures how many wins a player adds to his team over a replacement level player over the entire course of a season. Now, we're going to be using baseballreference.com metrics. Here's how it measures out. You know, the higher the number, the better the player, of course. A replacement player is at 0. A reserve level player would be like 0 to 2. A starter would be like 2 and above. Generally, an all-star player would be in this level of 5, and to be an MVP, you've got to be somewhere in this 8 category. Now, these are the 5 best seasons ever by a designated hitter using the wins above replacement measuring. Edgar Martinez, number 1 is the 1995 season. Now, Shohei Ohtani, this is him last year when he was worth 6. Just as a hitter, of course, he was also worth a lot as a pitcher. That's how he won another MVP award. Now, this is where Ohtani is right now currently. That's 3.1 wins above replacement through 48 games. That projects out to 10.5, which would be way easily the best for the DH ever, and it definitely puts him in the conversation at least for MVP, if not the driver's seat. So the Dodgers, I mean, it looks like they're actually getting their money's worth for their $700 million man this season anyway.
Now, in NBA news, the playoffs resume tonight with Boston hosting Indiana in Game 1 of the conference finals. What is the playing status of Boston's Kristaps Porzingis?
Yeah, Porzingis is still listed as out for tonight. He's still out with that calf injury. So the Celtics are going to turn to 37-year-old Al Horford. Now, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Horford in Game 5 against Cleveland, 22 points, 15 rebounds, and hit 6 three-pointers, so he had quite a game there. He's been a good player for a long time. Now, let's actually look at the playoff bracket here in the East. Game 1 tonight, as you said, between the Celtics and Pacers. This is going to be in Boston. And then tomorrow night, we've got the Western Conference Finals starting. Dallas will be at Minnesota there. That will be on Wednesday night. So more NBA action starts right tonight.
Well, Dave, as always, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, Tiff.
2023 marked another year for a record number of stolen vehicles, according to the National Insurance Crime Bureau. NTD's Andrew Thomas speaks with a law enforcement expert to discuss the surge in car thefts across the country and the models thieves target most.
The National Insurance Crime Bureau found that more than 1 million vehicles were reported stolen last year. According to the nonprofit, the Hyundai Elantra, Hyundai Sonata, and Kia Optima were the most popular among car thieves.
We have what we're calling monitoring the Kia kids. And these are kids as young as 12 to 18, 19 years old. And there's a glitch in the system with Kias that they're stealing those and then committing other kinds of crimes with them.
Fuda has more than 30 years of law enforcement experience. He says thieves often use stolen cars as battering rams.
We've had a lot of pot shop smash and grab burglaries where they'll steal 2 cars, smash the building with one, and then take whatever product they're doing and run in the other. And then the same thing with the shock and awe armed robberies into convenience stores.
Fuda argues that when there's no deterrence or consequences for crime in general, thieves can graduate to robbery and even murder. He cites a tragic instance from March 2022.
2 kids had done a shock and awe robbery of a pot shop. They were given ankle monitors, sent home. 3 days later, they cut those ankle monitors off, went to a pot shop in Tacoma, and ended up shooting and killing a pot shop employee. So they escalate, and the accountability part is not there.
According to the NICB, Washington, D.C., Maryland, and Connecticut saw the largest percentage increases in stolen vehicles for 2023. By number of cars stolen, California, Texas, and Florida took the top 3 spots. But Fuda says there are several ways for drivers to protect their vehicles.
There are services out there. There's the like OnStar that will track your car. There are kits that have automatic shutoffs for your car if you drive away. You know, always it's the common things. Make sure your car's locked. Leave nothing exposed or valuable in your vehicle. Make sure your keys are with you. Those kinds of things.
If those measures fail, it's important to call the police as soon as possible to increase the chances of recovering your vehicle. Andrew Thomas, NTD News.
And that's all for today's news. For round-the-clock coverage, visit us at ntd.com or download our NTD app. Thanks for tuning in. I'm Tiffany Meyer. Good night.